Detroit Today. Deborah Powers, associate professor at the Klein College of Media and Communication at Temple University.
But I do think the pandemic has really underscored that we're all connected. I'm connected to a homeless man who lives on the street corner, and I'm connected to that person who lives in the mansion on the hill. Like, we're all connected, and we can't get out of that. We're all the human species.
Detroit Today. Heard weekdays at 9 a.m. and 7 p.m. on 1019 WDET.
And on the show today, home improvement prices have skyrocketed during the pandemic. Stephen Henderson.
Yeah, they claim it's cheaper to take your house apart and sell it piece by piece these days. Yup, how do you like that one, folks?
The next WDET Concert at Home series.
Take your house apart.
Female trio James Brown. They'll perform live virtually on Thursday, May the 20th at 7 p.m. It's free as our gift to you, our listeners. Register.
Yup, take that house apart, folks, and sell it.
Can't wait for the weekend. Did you know that all of WDET's music programs are available 7 days a week? Check out the on-demand version of your favorite show at WDET.org/shows.
There you go, folks. Check them out. Shows. Good shit.
That's Dort Highway in Flint, is closed at Pier Road
Flint.
because of a crash. A slight chance of rain this morning, otherwise cloudy today with a high of 58.
Where'd it go?
Cloudy tonight, a low of 41. Mostly cloudy now and 48 degrees in Detroit. Next news at 5:30 on WDET.
Thought you fell down for a minute there.
Support for NPR.
Like, where did she go?
This station. And from the Zimmel Family Foundation, supporting Shatterproof, a national...
Gee, they made you walk?
dedicated to ending the
That's
devastation of
bullshit.
addiction.
Especially with all these new fences they put in. They're supposed to shuttle you guys.
Shatterproof.org. From the Ford Foundation.
I'll be telling the union about that tomorrow.
Front lines of social change worldwide.
Oh my God, that's even better!
Learn more on Ford Foundation.
Have fun!
From the Light
That was awesome.
Foundation, supporting justice, equity, and opportunity.
Wrong truck.
For all
Oops.
people to foster and sustain safe and healthy communities.
Nice.
Langloff.org. And from the WT Grant Foundation.
Poor lady.
WT Grant Foundation.
Worked all the way over there in that other building, and then she was trying to get in the wrong truck.
It's Morning Edition from NPR News. I'm Noelle King. And I'm Rachel Martin. While wealthy countries are snapping up vaccines, people in some countries in Africa remain largely shut out.
Yeah.
So far, they've gotten less than 1% of the world's
Yeah.
COVID-19 vaccines.
It's all because of the American
But there's
people.
another
It's all their
problem. Some of
fault.
these countries are struggling to administer the few doses they do have. NPR's Narit Eisenman explains.
Emily Janik is with the aid group CARE. Since early February, when the first COVID vaccines began trickling into low and middle income
I don't know,
countries,
man.
Janik has been tracking their use. She's noticed a worrying trend. While some countries like Ghana and Rwanda gave the shots to people almost immediately, quite a number of other countries are taking a while.
What we found is that a lot of countries have received doses but haven't administered them yet, or haven't administered a significant proportion of them yet.
3 countries have yet to administer a single dose. 13 more report using less than a fourth, almost all in Africa. The reasons for these delays vary. Malawi, for example, was vaccinating at a pretty good clip at first. Amos Zindi is CARE's country director there. He remembers how driving around the capital, Lilongwe, he'd see people waiting in long lines outside the vaccination centers.
In those days when vaccination was at the peak,
So they're taking their time vaccinating people, folks, in other countries.
Then came the news
There's something shady about all of this, you know?
Use of the AstraZeneca vaccine.
AstraZeneca.
Blood clots in a small number of people.
Oh, that got blood clots too?
Vaccine Malawi is using. In Malawi, young people in particular were buzzing about this.
You know, it's a global village where information that is generated in Europe, in the Americas, it takes in a matter of seconds. Everyone gets it. And that discouraged many of our young people.
Overnight, the lines outside the vaccination centers evaporated. Since then, Europe's regulatory agency has advised that AstraZeneca is still safe and effective and says its benefits far outweigh its risks. But people in Malawi remain so distrustful now. The government recently had to destroy 16,000 doses of vaccine that expired before they could be used.
I was like, oh my God, we've just lost 16,000, 16,000 lives that could have been saved. It's so painful.
But Malawi had at least managed to use about 60% of the doses it had gotten. Even more dire is the situation in the Democratic Republic of Congo. There, the government got 1.7 million doses of AstraZeneca in early March. held off on using them while waiting for new guidance after the blood clot issue, and has now concluded even though it wants to use the vaccine, it's too late. It will be logistically impossible to give Congo's shots before they expire. Here's CARE's Emily Janik again.
One of the issues is just sheer.
So J&J and AstraZeneca could possibly cause a blood clot, kill you.
Big investments.
That's a big deal of yeah, man, folks.
Kind of a massive campaign
Yep.
with a completely new population that typically
Check it
doesn't
out.
get vaccinated in such a short time.
Congo says it will
Crazy,
hand over
man.
much of its vaccine to other countries. South Sudan, in a similar bind, has announced it will be discarding 60,000 doses that have already expired. Janik says the lesson here is that donor countries and organizations need to put a lot more money into the logistical costs of vaccine delivery in poor countries.
About half of that needs to go to health workers, to their salaries, to supporting them, to training them.
A big problem, says Janik. Those expenses were largely left out when the major international organizations that are getting vaccines to poor countries estimated the operational cost. Instead, they mostly focused on raising money for cold chain supplies. And even that far more modest target has barely been funded. Narit Eisenman, NPR News.
A monster fish has been lurking in the Detroit River. It's one of the biggest lake sturgeon ever caught in this country. Here's Anna Marie Seisling of member station WDET.
Last Thursday started out like any other day on the Detroit River for 3 scientists with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Conservation Office in Alpena, Michigan. They were setting up fishing lines as part of their annual survey of the lake sturgeon population. Scientist Paige Wiegren says the biggest thing hauled in so far was a 5-gallon plastic bucket. But then everything changed.
And all of a sudden this gray and white shadow came to the surface, and for about 5 to 8 minutes we sort of struggled to try to get the fish into the net. Finally got the fish in the net, and we're able to, all 3 of us, pull her on the deck of the boat, and that's when it really sunk in how large this fish was.
Not just large, but a record-setting giant, weighing in at 240 pounds and measuring nearly 7 feet long and about 4 feet around. Scientists think the fish is a female and at least 100 years old. After taking a photo of the fish lying next to one of the crew members for scale, the giant sturgeon was tagged with a microchip and released back into the river.
Wow.
In the 19th century, it's estimated there were more than 500,000 sturgeon swimming in the Detroit River. Scientists now believe there are fewer than 7,000.
Wow.
The decline is due to overfishing and habitat destruction. But
And
Jason
that wasn't
Fisher,
caught with a
the
hook and a
scientist
rod
on the
either.
boat, says the river's water has vastly improved in recent decades.
We see kind of world-class fisheries in the Detroit
Wow.
River and the St. Clair River. I can think of just a whole bunch of walleye fishermen who would agree with me.
Jennifer Johnson,
That's
the
wild,
scientist
folks.
lying next to the giant sturgeon in a photo that's gone viral, thinks the catch captures so many people's
Look it up,
imagination
folks. Giant
it shows that
sturgeon.
larger-than-life,
In
almost
Michigan here,
mythical
folks.
creatures still exist.
That's pretty cool, you know?
Survived for so long.
Yup.
Probably seen way more than any of us.
Look at
can
that beautiful
imagine.
sky,
Is
folks.
kind of phenomenal. And just, I think everybody loves a good, like, fish story. You know?
Hell yeah.
A fish story, which in this case involves a nearly 7-foot-long, century-old sturgeon swimming
Wow.
in a river that feeds industry in one of America's
1,000,
largest cities.
100 years old,
For
the
NPR
fish.
News, I'm Anna Marie Seisling in
Now they can track it, man. This is wild. Now I'd like to, I'd love to know if you could go online and follow that fish. That would be awesome. Yup. Yeah, man, that'd be pretty cool. I really think.
This is
After making hotels and restaurants are staffing shortages are staying closed.
new survey of international public opinion, but views of the U.S. are improving. Rob Schmitz has that story in 5 minutes. Then we'll hear from Joe Palca on researchers who are exploring a mix and match strategy for vaccinating people against COVID-19. That means using 2 different kinds of vaccines instead of the same one twice.
Live from NPR News in Washington, I'm Dave Mattingly. President Biden says
Dave
by
Mattingly?
July 4th, he wants 70%
It's almost
of
like,
adults
hey,
in
I'm
the
Don
US to
Mattingly.
receive at least one dose of a COVID-19
I'm retired from the Yankees,
President's
first
goal
baseman.
equates to roughly 181 million people being administered a shot.
Don Mattingly drove a Ford
The Food and
Ranger,
Drug
folks.
Administration is expected to authorize Pfizer's COVID-19
He had a little white
vaccine
Ford
for those
Ranger
12 to 15
back in the
years
day.
old.
Brand
The
new,
announcement could come
new
as early
style.
as next week. President Biden says if the FDA
Good
does
morning.
so,
How are you?
20,000
Welcome to the
pharmacies
stream.
across the country would take part.
Listening to some liberal
Facebook
news
is
radio,
expected to
live
announce
from
this
Detroit.
morning whether it will allow former President Donald Trump back on its platform. NPR's Giles Snyder says Trump was banned by the social media giant following the January 6th riot at the U.S. Capitol building.
Yeah, that's some
Facebook's
bullshit.
decision to ban the former president indefinitely following the Capitol attack by his supporters was unprecedented. It was the first social media company to suspend his account, and now the impending decision by the Oversight Board, created and funded by Facebook, is being closely watched as a marker for regulating online speech.
Facebook is a financial supporter of NPR. A report from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention says the birth rate in the U.S. dropped 4% last year. It's the sharpest annual decrease in nearly a half century. This is NPR News.
And I'm Pat Batchelor with news from WDET at 5:31. A University of Michigan study finds noise levels on residential streets with truck traffic in southwest Detroit can reach almost 74 decibels. That number exceeds the federal government's limit and is significantly louder than in neighborhoods of comparable size. Stuart Batterman is professor of environmental health sciences at the university. He says those noise levels can harm people's health.
You won't get good sleep. You won't be able to talk on the porch. You can have additional stress that impacts your health and your well-being. So it's just a real general stressor.
Batterman says air pollution from trucks is also a problem in southwest Detroit. He says UM plans to do more research on how traffic affects air quality. The Detroit City Council held its first meeting without Gabe Leland, who resigned Monday after pleading guilty to misconduct in office. As WDET's Eli Newman reports, the council debated funding for the city's Charter Revision Commission.
The revised charter expands language access, creates a water affordability rate system, and introduces a youth employment program for the city to manage. The drafting commission has asked for more money to circulate the document to residents ahead of an August election. And city council member Scott Benson says he is wary to do so, given objections from city and state executives.
I just cannot support expending those type of dollars to print a document that has not been approved.
After discussions, Detroit City Council unanimously approved some of the requested funding. Governor Gretchen Whitmer and Mayor Mike Duggan opposed the charter revisions. They say the policies could generate a fiscal crisis, causing Detroit to fall back under active state oversight.
They need it.
WDET News.
Voters in 7 Metro Detroit school districts approved bonds for building improvements and other big-ticket items. Turnout was light, and most of the ballots were absentees. Wyandotte voters selected Jim DeSena as the city's new mayor, been acting in that capacity since Mayor Joe Peterson's death a year ago. Checking traffic, Dort Highway M54 is closed between the Pier Road and Lippincott Boulevard because of a crash. A slight chance of rain this morning, otherwise cloudy today. High of 58, cloudy and 47 degrees now. Sports in less than 10 minutes on WDET. It's 5:34.
Support for NPR comes from this station and from Eric and Wendy Schmidt through the Schmidt Family Foundation, working together to create a just world where all people have access to renewable energy, clean air and water, and healthy food. On the web at theschmidt.org. From the Walton Family Foundation, working to solve social and environmental problems to improve lives today and benefit future generations. More information at waltonfamilyfoundation.org.
It's the Wally World, folks.
Foundation.
The Waltons.
It's Morning Edition from NPR News. I'm Noel King.
Good morning. Welcome to the stream, folks. How are you?
More democracy.
How are you, folks? Be the first to comment this morning, folks.
At least that's according to a new poll.
I'm awake.
Today. More than 50,000 people across more than 50
Making that money Bergs will never see, folks.
Joins us from Berlin to talk about it. Hi, Rob.
Good morning, Rachel.
Before we get to the conclusions of this particular poll, tell us how it was done, who did it.
Yeah, the survey is called the Democracy Perception Index, and it's been conducted each year since 2018 by the Berlin-based research firm Latana and the Alliance of Democracies, which is a nonprofit based in Copenhagen dedicated to the advancement of democracy. This is the largest survey on democracy in the world. The goal here is to try and dig into what people see as the biggest threats to democracy globally.
And what are they?
Well, the first ones you would probably predict, yes, these probably are big threats. Economic inequality, limits on free speech, unfair elections, and social media. But 44% of those surveyed said another threat to democracy worldwide is the influence of the United States. That ranked higher than the influence of China or Russia. I spoke to Fred DeVoe about this finding. He's a senior researcher at Latana, and he said, by and large, there was one region responsible for this perception of the U.S. as a threat to democracy.
In most of the world, most people think that the United States has a more positive impact than negative impact. But in European countries and many of the United States' allies, the balance is actually the other way. Where more people say that the United States has a negative impact on democracy than positive.
How is that so, Rob? I mean, he's saying that people who live in the countries that have the closest ties to the U.S. are the same people who see the U.S. as a threat to democracy worldwide?
Yeah, that's right. And, from my perch here in Berlin, it's clear that former President Trump was extremely unpopular in much of Europe. Many people here saw him as a threat to democracy and think the movement that he channeled is still a threat. More than half the respondents here in Germany said the U.S. has a net negative impact on global democracy, while less than a third believed it was a positive impact. China, though, was also seen as a threat, particularly by people who live in Asia. People in Taiwan, Hong Kong, Vietnam, Singapore see China as the bigger threat. So it seems like the smaller countries closest to the great powers, like China and the U.S., were the ones who were most critical of them.
You mentioned this is an annual survey.
Right.
How has the global view of the U.S. and democracy changed since last year?
Well, Rachel, surprisingly, given what we just discussed, it's actually gotten better. Since last year, the perception of U.S. influence on democracy has actually increased significantly, 14%. 14% more people worldwide said the U.S. has a positive influence on democracy. This increase was particularly high here in Germany, as well as among Chinese respondents. The survey takers see this as what they call a Biden effect, a sign that globally, President Biden is seen as a bigger champion of democracy than former President